If you've been watching the channel for a while, then you might recall a video from a few years ago, where I covered Hershey's Chocolate Tour. You can go watch that video if you wish, it's pretty interesting. But just to recap, Hershey used to offer a tour of its chocolate factory, which started in 1910 and ran up through 1973, closing because the demand for the tour exceeded the capacity of the factory. The same year, Hershey opened Hershey's Chocolate World just right outside of Hershey Park, and inside, one of the educational exhibits was the Hershey Chocolate Tour, which was a fantastic dark ride for its time. While the ride has gone through many iterations, some much more interesting than others, the core of the ride has always focused on educating visitors about the chocolate making process, which, while not the same as the actual factory tour, certainly is a clever substitution. Part of why I even produced the video was because I wondered why something like Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory had never been built as a ride, and while Alton Towers actually did have a Charlie and the Chocolate Factory boat ride from 2006 up through 2015, it never lived up to the film adaptations of the story. However, it reminded me a bit of Hershey's Chocolate Tour, which I had experienced a version of as a child, and coming back to it, I thought that Hershey had quite the unique experience, creating a ride fit for a World's Fair that still managed to remain quite fascinating 50 years later. However, what surprised me was just how many people in the comments expressed that this reminded them quite a bit of Cadbury World in Birmingham. Until that point, I didn't know that Cadbury had its own themed chocolate tour that included a dark ride, and while it was certainly interesting, I didn't feel the need to cover it so recently after covering Hershey. However, Cadbury World was bought up by Merlin Entertainments in 2022, and I was surprised to learn that they recently closed the original dark ride, which was called Cadabra, replacing it with some cheap trackless screen blaster. I didn't know much about Cadabra, but on investigating further, it's a short but fascinatingly weird ride, and as someone who enjoys the bizarre side of dark rides, I regret not having covered this sooner. So today, let's take a quick look at what Cadbury World offers, because there really are some cool things going on in here as a fan of themed entertainment, and now that Cadabra has closed, I think it's time to take a closer look at one of the more interesting dark rides that I've ever seen. In 1824, John Cadbury began selling coffee, tea, and cocoa drinks off of Bull Street in Birmingham, and in 1831, expanded the business by purchasing a warehouse in the city, where he began to manufacture other cocoa products. By 1849, Cadbury had produced a chocolate bar to compete with Fry's Chocolate and Cocoa, and after a few ups and downs over the next few decades, the company moved production to the countryside a few miles outside of the city in 1879, opening the factory where Cadbury World is located today. Similar to the company town in Hershey, Pennsylvania, which was actually known for its high standard of living and good schools, Cadbury developed a village around the factory for its employees and put a lot of money into providing good living conditions and abundant recreation for their families. By 1900, the village became independent, and while I can't find a starting date, the factory did offer tours, which stopped in 1969 due to health and safety concerns. However, the tour was revived in 1990 with the opening of Cadbury World, an educational attraction that taught visitors about the history of Cadbury chocolate, and took them on a walking tour through the factory that allowed them to view the chocolate making process through windows that would prevent contamination of the product. Quickly, Cadbury World evolved into a more streamlined experience to handle its overwhelming attendance, and offered more exhibits and even a playground to occupy the attention of children, and in 1997, the facility introduced Cadabra, a Magical Journey, which, as I stated earlier, was notable for its weirdness. On entering the facility, admission can be purchased in a lobby area, which also includes the world's largest Cadbury shop off to the side, or at least it was the world's largest until recently, where Merlin significantly reduced its size. At the start of the tour, visitors first entered the Cocoa Tree Forest, which, despite the name, is an atmospheric walkthrough of an Aztec jungle with educational mock-ups of how cocoa beans were harvested and used by the Aztec people. I'm always a fan of this kind of detailed exhibit, so already, Cadbury World is pretty interesting to me. As you continue the tour, you see the invasion by the Spaniards who are introduced to the cocoa bean, which results in it being shipped back to Europe. The next portion of the tour takes visitors through small sets on a Spanish ship, where scenes projected onto glass tell the story of how the bean was transported back to Spain and prepared for consumption there, which resulted in its spread throughout Europe. The ship then lets out into a recreation of Birmingham in the 1820s, where you can see John Cadbury's first shop. This area is used for thematic presentations, but also leads into a theater where you watch a 15-minute film that extensively covers the history of Cadbury and their chocolate making process. From here, you tour the factory, which used to allow an actual view into the assembly line of Cadbury chocolate production, but most of that has since been covered up with informational signs and exhibits where you interact with employees who put on small presentations. Cadabra was located during this segment of the tour, but coming to the end, another theme segment was Advertising Avenue, a small atmospheric exhibit that covers the history of Cadbury advertisement. Here, there were displays with more projection scenes, as well as some animatronic or kinetic figures, some of which were made to look like chocolate. On the stranger side of things, there's a room with a chocolate kid acting as a DJ, who introduces an animatronic ape playing a drum kit to Phil Collins' In the Air Tonight. This seemed utterly bizarre, but Cadbury did air a commercial in 2007 with a gorilla playing the same song, so the context does make sense here. Unfortunately, Advertising Avenue had many of its exhibits removed as it became a queue for the new trackless ride in 2024, so that's disappointing to see many elements removed, but after exiting this area, the tour concluded with a museum-like exhibit which teaches about Cadbury history and has many historical branded products on display, which is certainly interesting. At the end of the tour, you would enter the Cadbury shop you saw at the beginning, but there is also an outside area, which includes some small food stands and a playground, as well as a moving theater attraction known as 4D Chocolate Adventure, taking you on a journey with Cadbury's iconic characters. Overall, while much of the actual factory tour has been greatly reduced, and Merlin is making major changes to what the tour was even from just last year, it's still a notable themed experience that looked interesting to me as a fan of themed entertainment. However, like I said, the ride was pretty much right in the middle of the tour, so let's take a look at what it actually was. Cadabra, A Magical Journey, begins as you board a small car and travel through the pages of a storybook scene. Here you are introduced to the cocoa beans, which the ride implies that you take the role of, setting off to search for the secret ingredient that makes Cadbury chocolate just so magical. Exiting the exposition scene, you enter the delicious garden, where cocoa beans swing on vines, and one of them shouts like Tarzan. Progressing, you encounter animated flowers and cocoa beans, passing by what I believe is the Cadbury Caramel Bunny, who raises her paw up to eat a chocolate bar. After passing by a cocoa tree with some strange figures underneath, you travel out of the garden and into Beanville. Here, you wind through the town as the cocoa bean residents peek out at you from their doors or windows as they make strange cooing noises at you, and coming up on the clock tower, you're encouraged to look at Mr. Cadbury's parrot, a character who directs your attention towards an on-ride photo. Moving out of the scene, you witness more cocoa bean residents making cutesy noises as they live out their strange lives, and passing under a bridge, you transition out into the countryside where cows are emerging out from the bushes alongside dancing milk bottles. The cows do say something, although I can't make out what it is from any video I've watched. And next, you travel into a winter snow scene where the cocoa beans are ice skating and skiing among other activities. Traveling into a snowy mountain cave, the lighting fades out and you find yourself surrounded by stars where you see constellations of elements that go into Cadbury chocolate. From here, cocoa beans on the screen say their goodbyes to you, and the ride abruptly ends. With a ride time of a little over 4 minutes, Cadabra is definitely strange. It doesn't have a lot of content to it, mostly just taking you through scenes meant to be cute, where cocoa beans perform pretty ordinary tasks. It's certainly a little strange and creepy, which is a big part of its appeal, but after watching through a few videos, I can see that Cadbury World really neglected the ride, with very few effects working in its last few years of operation. When Merlin took over, they let the ride fall into a state where it barely operated because they intended to replace it, and as mentioned earlier, Advertisement Avenue became the new queue for a trackless dark ride. Known as Cadbury Chocolate Quest, this incredibly linear experience that might as well just be tracked equips you with blasters to shoot at different objects on screens to score points as you follow different Cadbury characters. It's a short 2.5 minute ride that's just a whole lot of nothing, and while Cadabra wasn't really great from a design perspective either, at least it was a lot more built out and had a unique, creepy charm that stuck with people. As a fan of dark rides, often because they can come off as strange through their execution, Cadabra is a ride that I wish I could have gotten to experience before it was torn out for more Merlin schlock. Chocolate Quest is just another boring, disposable screen shooter that the industry should really not be producing any longer, and judging from the reception I've seen online, a lot of Cadbury World visitors are really unhappy with how Merlin is running the tour. At the time of producing this video, Cadbury World still seems to be in a transition period as Merlin reworks the experience and possibly adds new attractions, but if the responses I received on my Legoland Florida video indicates anything, it's that people really do not like how Merlin runs its parks. I've enjoyed a few of their attractions at Icon Park in Orlando, but otherwise, people have been pretty vocal about their cost-cutting and cash grabs at parks they operate throughout the world, and especially in the UK, and judging from Chocolate Quest, it appears that Merlin may not move Cadbury World in a positive direction through its transformation. While it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, I don't think that we can deny that Cadbury World at least has some interesting themed experiences, and that while not a fantastic ride, Cadabra was at least interesting enough to deserve to have a short video taking a look at what it offered. If you enjoy videos on this channel, whether it's the big stuff or small attractions like this, you can do me a favor by leaving a like, which helps the videos reach a wider audience. As always, if you have not yet hit the subscribe button with bell notification yet either, you can do so now to be alerted to new videos as they release.